I've been working as an ICU nurse for about 8 years now, and let me just say, I've seen a lot. People think the worst part of the job is losing patients, and yeah, that hurts. But what they don't talk about are the quiet hours, especially on night shifts, when the ward goes still. When monitors beep softly in the dark, and the only sounds you hear are machines breathing for people. I used to love those shifts, weirdly enough. The calmness, the low light. This happened in 2019 before the pandemic hit, and I was working full-time nights at a hospital in southern Ohio. I'm not going to name the facility, I still work in the area, and honestly, some of the staff still don't talk about what happened. That night started like any other. I came in a little early to get the patient handoff, grabbed a stale coffee from the staff lounge, and settled into my usual routine. Room checks, meds, vitals. Everything was quiet, almost too quiet for a Thursday. Around 2:40 a.m., I was sitting at the central station reviewing some charts when I heard it for the first time. It was subtle, like a breath caught between static. The intercom clicked on, and I heard this faint voice. It wasn't just noise. It was talking. I froze, listening. It was coming from room 217. Here's the thing. Room 217 had been empty for months. Not just empty. Shut down. The last person in there was a patient named Everett Cole, a 57-year-old man who came in with multiple fractures after a car wreck. He was being transferred for surgery when the ambulance crashed just a few blocks from the hospital. He never made it. After that, the room stayed closed for repairs. But honestly, I think nobody wanted to deal with it. It still had his name label on the chart holder by the door, half torn, like nobody wanted to touch it. So when I heard that voice come through and saw the indicator light on the console flash green, my stomach just dropped. I pressed the respond button out of instinct and said, "This is the ICU. Who's there?" Silence. Then, click. The line went dead. I got up and walked toward room 217. The door was shut, as usual, and the lights inside were off. But as I got closer, I swear I heard something. Whispers, low and wet, like someone trying to talk through tears. It wasn't coming from the hallway or the nurse station intercom. It was coming from inside. I didn't open the door. I don't know why, I've faced way worse. But that night, something in me said, don't. I told myself maybe it was just some freak electrical glitch. ICU equipment goes haywire all the time. Intercoms, call lights, even ventilators can freak out if the wiring's bad. Still, I logged it in the incident report, casually, just to have a record. I didn't mention the whispers. Just, intercom malfunction, room 217. A few days went by without anything strange, and I started to convince myself I imagined it. Maybe I was just tired, you know? But then it happened again. This time at 3:11 a.m., exactly. Same static click, same weak voice. But now it sounded frantic. It kept saying something I couldn't quite make out, over and over. Almost like, "Can't move. Help me. Cold." That night I got brave, or stupid, and asked the tech on shift to come with me to check the room. His name was Marcus, a big guy, former military, not the type to scare easily. I didn't tell him why I wanted to check it, just said I thought something might have tripped the system again. We walked in together. The room was pitch black and freezing cold. Not just cool, cold, like walking into a freezer. The thermostat read 72, but I swear you could see our breath. The bed was neatly made, untouched. But the weird part? The pillow had a distinct indentation in it, like someone had just been lying there. Marcus noticed it too. He gave me this look like, "What the hell?" We checked the window, locked. No sign of tampering, no drafts. He shrugged it off, said maybe housekeeping leaned on the pillow earlier. But housekeeping hadn't touched that room in months. I knew that for a fact. They weren't even supposed to enter it. We left, and I reported it again. this time directly to the night supervisor. She brushed it off, said maintenance would double-check the wiring and not to worry. But I saw her face when I mentioned the voice. She didn't believe me, but she didn't want to hear more either. The next week, it became a pattern. Always after 2 a.m., always the same room. Sometimes the voice would say just one word, please. Other times, it would be a jumble of phrases, sobbing, gasping like someone trapped underwater. I stopped reporting it. Nobody cared. Or maybe they did, but nobody wanted to poke the hornet's nest. Nurses started avoiding that wing of the floor during late hours. People made jokes about ghost patients, but never stuck around long in that hallway. One of the new grads even asked to be reassigned after hearing the intercom click on while she was alone doing meds. Things escalated the night I stayed late to help cover a double shift. Around 3 a.m., I was alone at the nurse's station. The floor was dead quiet. Then the intercom clicked again, this time without static. Just silence. And then a man's voice, clear as day. "I didn't die there." That's what it said. I froze. My hand was still on the mouse, but I couldn't move. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone. Not pleading this time, just certain, like he was correcting me. And the worst part? My badge scanner lit up by itself, green, as if someone had just scanned in to enter room 217, but I was the only one there. I ran down the hall, heart pounding, and stood in front of the door. It was open just a crack, even though we always kept it shut. I pushed it open slowly, and I swear to you, I saw the shape of someone sitting up in the bed. Not standing, sitting, like they'd just woken up and were waiting. The light above the bed flickered once, then came on. But when I stepped inside, there was no one there. The bed was made. No indent this time. No cold. Just that same stale hospital air. I don't know why, but I whispered, "Everett?" Like maybe if I said his name, he'd stop. A week later, they locked the room permanently. No memo, no explanation. Just a keycard lock and a laminated sign that said, "Out of service, under maintenance." But it never came off. The light above the door stayed off permanently. And the intercom? They disconnected it. I know because I asked the maintenance guy, Jeff, after cornering him in the break room. He told me quietly, "That room's not wired to the console anymore. We cut the line completely." I believed him. But I also know that 2 nights after that, someone else, an ER float nurse, heard the voice again. From inside the room. To this day, I won't walk past room 217 during nights. I take the long way around, even if it adds 5 extra minutes to my route. I've transferred to another unit now, but sometimes I still hear things in my sleep. That voice. Not always words, just the rhythm of it. Like someone begging softly behind glass. Sometimes I wonder if Everett really did die in that ambulance. Or if a part of him didn't. I've never found any official report about the crash. No death certificate in the system either. Maybe it was just an error. Or maybe he never left the ICU at all. Either way, I don't think I'll ever forget that voice. I'm not usually the kind of person who shares stuff like this, but I've been carrying it for a few years now, and it still gives me chills when I think about it. Back in 2018, I was working as a night shift RN at a mid-sized hospital in upstate New York. I was in my 3rd year of nursing, floating between med-surg and the ICU, depending on the night. I wasn't married, no kids, just me and my cat in a tiny apartment 15 minutes from the hospital. I used to love the quiet of the night shift. Less chaos, more time to breathe. But there was this one stretch of nights that made me question everything I thought I believed about the world. It started on a Tuesday. I remember that clearly because I had just come off a weekend off, and I was actually in a good mood heading in. I was assigned to ICU that night. 4 patients, mostly stable. The unit was unusually quiet. Around 2:30 a.m., I was standing at the nurse's station finishing my charting when I noticed something in my peripheral vision. There's a big observation window that looks out into the hallway. It's usually empty at that hour. But for a split second, I saw a man standing there. He was wearing dark blue scrubs and just staring in. I only saw his reflection in the glass. By the time I turned my head, he was gone. I figured maybe it was someone from respiratory or housekeeping. It's not uncommon for staff to cut through ICU to get to other wings, but when I walked out into the hallway, it was completely empty. I even checked the nearest supply closet and the break room. Nothing. No footsteps, no doors closing. Just silence. I brushed it off as a trick of the light, or maybe I was more tired than I realized. Still, I remember how weird it felt. Like the air had shifted. He hadn't just been standing. He was facing me, watching. The next night, it happened again. Almost the same time. I was restocking the crash cart when I saw him through the window. Same dark blue scrubs, same posture. I turned quickly this time, determined to catch whoever was messing around. But again, no one was there. Not a sound. I asked my co-worker Melissa if she'd seen anyone come through, but she just gave me a tired look and said she hadn't seen a soul since midnight. That's when I really started to feel unsettled. It wasn't just what I saw. It was the feeling it left behind. Like static in my chest. By the 3rd night, I was actively trying to prove to myself it was just my mind playing tricks. I kept glancing at the observation window throughout my shift, telling myself there was nothing to see. But sure enough, sometime after 2 a.m., there he was again. This time, I caught more detail. His scrubs weren't the hospital-issue ones. They were a little older in style, and I noticed a faded white badge clipped to his chest, though I couldn't make out a name. His hair was dark and slightly messy, and he looked pale, almost gray under the fluorescent lights. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at me through the glass like he was trying to figure something out. My heart was pounding so loud I thought it would wake the patients. I stood frozen, just staring back at him. And then he was gone. Not like he walked away, gone as in blink, and he's not there. That time, I felt a pressure in my ears, like the air had thickened for a second, then everything snapped back to normal. I didn't even tell Melissa that time. I was starting to feel like I might actually be losing it. I considered calling in sick for my next shift, but part of me needed to see if it would happen again. I needed to make sense of it. And honestly, I wanted to know who he was, because the way he looked at me didn't feel random. It felt intentional. On my 4th night, I decided to bring it up casually with one of the older nurses, Karen. She'd been at the hospital since the early 2000s and had that no-nonsense vibe like nothing could shake her. I didn't say anything about a ghost or an apparition, just mentioned I'd seen a guy outside the ICU window a few nights in a row, always around the same time, but he never came in. She paused, real still, and then said something that made my stomach twist. Was he wearing dark blue scrubs? Look kind of out of place? When I nodded, her whole face changed. She got quiet, leaned in and whispered, "You should talk to security." That night, after my shift, I went straight to the security desk on the 1st floor. I didn't even know what I was going to say. I ended up describing the man and asking if they'd seen anyone matching that description on the cameras outside ICU. The guy at the desk, Chuck, looked at me for a long second before calling over another guard. Together, they pulled up footage from the last few nights. My heart was thudding as we skimmed through the timestamps. But when we got to the moment I remembered so clearly, the figure in the window staring at me, there was no one there. Just me, working alone, with nothing on the other side of that glass. I didn't sleep at all that day. My mind kept replaying the footage. How could I see him so clearly if the cameras showed nothing? That night, before my shift, I pulled Karen aside again and told her everything. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "I was here when it happened." I didn't even have to ask what she meant. She sat down, real quiet, like she was weighing whether to go on. Then she told me about Dr. Russell. He was a trauma surgeon back in the early 2000s, well respected, but something went wrong during a routine procedure. A young woman died. Her family sued the hospital for malpractice. Before the case could go to trial, Dr. Russell was found dead in the east hallway. Suicide. Right outside the ICU observation window. She said people used to talk about it, especially nurses on the night shift. A few had reported seeing someone who matched his description standing in that same hallway. But over the years, the sightings stopped. No one had brought it up in a long time. Karen had never seen him herself, but said she believed the stories. "He always looked lost," she said, "like he wasn't trying to scare anyone, just stuck." I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to believe it was just an old rumor that got in my head. But another part of me remembered the way he looked at me, like he was trying to say something but couldn't. On my next shift, I left a note taped to the inside of the observation window. It just said, "I see you." I don't even know why I did it. Maybe to get closure, maybe out of some weird respect. That night nothing happened. Same the next. I worked 3 more nights and never saw him again. But the last time I looked at that window, the note was gone. I asked everyone on the unit. Nobody touched it. It didn't fall. It was just gone. That was the last time I ever worked a night shift in the ICU. I requested a permanent transfer to Med-Surg days later. Even now, years later, I still think about his face, about how real it felt. I'm not saying I saw a ghost. I don't even know if I believe in that kind of thing. But I know what I saw. And I know the look in his eyes wasn't something I imagined. It was heavy, regretful, like he'd been waiting for someone to notice him. I think about that sometimes, especially when I pass by that part of the hospital. I don't work there anymore, but I still dream about those nights. And sometimes, in those dreams, I'm the one standing on the other side of the glass, waiting to be seen. I'm not really the type to believe in ghosts or anything like that. I'm a nurse. We live in the world of charts, vitals, protocols, logic. I've been working in the ICU of a mid-sized hospital in Kansas City for about 6 years now. When this happened, I was 3 years into my job, still new enough to be impressionable, but seasoned enough to know what was normal and what wasn't. I was on the night shift, working mostly weekends, and my schedule back then had me covering 3 12-hour shifts in a row. It was brutal, but I liked the quiet. Less visitors, less commotion, more time to focus on the work. There's this supply room right around the corner from ICU 3. Nothing fancy, just a narrow, dimly lit closet with a flickering fluorescent light and metal shelves on both sides. We stored all sorts of stuff in there: saline bags, tubing, extra linens, syringes, gloves. It's the kind of place you're in and out of 10 times a shift without even thinking about it. But there was this drawer, bottom right corner of the metal cabinet against the wall, that had started to slide open, by itself. Always that same drawer. Every shift. At first I thought maybe it wasn't closing all the way and just slipping out over time, so I'd push it in harder. But no matter how tightly I shoved it shut, it would be sticking out again by the time I came back. It became sort of a joke among the night staff. "Oh, it's the ghost drawer again," someone would say, and we'd all chuckle and move on. But something about it rubbed me the wrong way. The drawer was completely empty. Always had been. We don't even use it. It doesn't have a label, no barcode, nothing. The rest of the drawers are all packed and cataloged. This one? Just a clean, cold metal bin that kept opening like it had somewhere to be. I started closing it more forcefully each time. Once I even stacked a bag of IV fluids in front of it. That didn't help. It was open again a few hours later, and the IV bag had been pushed to the side. One night I stayed behind after my shift to help a new hire organize the room. Around 5 a.m. the unit was quiet. Everyone was charting or catching their breath after a code blue earlier in the night. I was crouched near the bottom shelf, stacking surgical masks, when I glanced over and saw that damn drawer had opened again. This time, something was inside. A piece of folded paper curled slightly at the edges like it had been there a long time. I stared at it for a few seconds. I hadn't put anything in there. No one had. I called over to Angela, the new nurse I was helping, and asked if she'd seen it before. She shook her head and said, "I didn't even know that drawer opened." I pulled the paper out and immediately noticed the hospital logo at the top, faded, like it had been copied on an old machine. It was a DNR form. Do not resuscitate. The name at the top hit me like a punch to the chest. Linda Chavez. I didn't recognize it at first, but something about it itched at the back of my brain. The date was from 3 years earlier, almost to the day. The form had been filled out, signed by a physician, signed by the patient. All valid, but it had a red stamp diagonally across it that read, "Resuscitated, code blue." I just stood there staring at it. My hands felt cold, like they weren't even mine. Angela asked me what it was, but I didn't answer. I couldn't. Later that morning, I dug into her name in our archived system, Linda Chavez, and there she was. Room ICU 3. Same room I'd been assigned to earlier that week. I opened the incident report. She'd coded. They'd worked her for 20 minutes, got a pulse back, but she passed away a few hours later. The notes were vague, but one thing stood out in the physician's comment. No DNR located at bedside or in chart at time of event. Resuscitation initiated by default. My stomach sank. That form had never made it to her file. It had been forgotten, or misplaced. And now it had shown up, out of nowhere, in an empty drawer that had no reason to open. After that, I started paying more attention to that room. ICU 3. It always felt cold, even when the rest of the unit was warm. Not freezing, just off. Like the air didn't move the same way. Like sound didn't echo right in there. One night I had to change the linen after a patient transfer. I was in there alone, flipping the mattress, when I thought I heard a breath behind me. Not a voice, not a word. Just a breath. Long, slow, like someone exhaling right over my shoulder. I turned around so fast I nearly tripped over the IV pole, but the room was empty. I laughed it off at first, but it stuck with me. Because the drawer had opened that night too, and there was nothing in it again. I told my supervisor quietly about the drawer and the DNR form. I didn't want to sound crazy, but I figured there should be some kind of report or explanation. She looked at me for a long second, then said, "That room's always had issues." That's all she said. No further detail. Just issues. Like that explained anything. I asked her if she remembered Linda Chavez. She nodded. Yeah, that case was a mess. Her daughter came in screaming the next day. Said the DNR had been filed, but nobody listened. Said we forced her mother to die in pain when she just wanted peace. My supervisor didn't say it with malice. Just tiredness. Like it was just one more thing in a long list of regrets she carried. After that night, the drawer stopped opening for a while. A week went by, maybe 2, and nothing. I started to think it was over, that maybe whatever needed to be found had been found. But then, just as I let my guard down, I came into work and saw it wide open again. No one else had touched it. I asked around. Angela said she hadn't even gone into the supply room that night. I walked over, heart pounding, expecting something new inside. But it was empty, just like before. And for some reason that felt worse. like something was waiting for me to do something else, but I didn't know what. That night, I printed a copy of the DNR form and placed it in ICU 3's bedside drawer. I know it doesn't make sense. The patient was long gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Linda Chavez's death hadn't settled, that she'd been robbed of something final. So I left it there, carefully folded, and even said a few words under my breath. I apologized. For the mistake, for the system, for whatever part I played, even if I hadn't been on staff when it happened. I just needed to feel like I'd acknowledged her, like someone had. And you know what? The drawer hasn't opened since. It's been over a year now. I've switched shifts. I work days again. ICU 3 is still used. Different patients, different stories. But every time I walk past that supply room, I glance at the cabinet. That bottom drawer stays closed. I've never touched it again. No one talks about it anymore, like it's just gone. But sometimes, especially on quiet mornings, I still feel that breath on my neck when I'm alone in that room. I don't think Linda was angry. I think she just wanted to be seen, to be heard. And I hope, really hope, that now she finally rests. I used to work the night shift at a mid-sized hospital just outside of Spokane, Washington. This was back in the winter of 2019. I remember because we had an insane flu surge that season, and most of my shifts felt like marathons. At the time, I was about 3 years into my career as a registered nurse, mid-20s, single, and completely consumed by my work. Night shifts were quieter, usually more predictable, and honestly, I preferred the calm. Most nights were the same. Rounds, meds, patient checks, some charting, and maybe a vending machine dinner at 2 a.m. But one night, something shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just off, subtle, but it left a mark on me I can't really shake. We had a long-term care unit in the East Wing. Nothing fancy, just 6 identical hospital beds, each with the usual setup. Monitoring equipment, rolling tray tables, standard-issue privacy curtains. That night I remember walking in for the routine 3 a.m. bed count, clipboard in hand, half awake and sipping lukewarm coffee. When I reached the end of the room, I stopped. There were 7 beds. One in the far left corner near the window, a spot I'd never seen a bed in before. And it wasn't empty. There was a man lying there, turned to the side, blanket pulled up to his chest. Pale. Still. I didn't recognize him. My first instinct was to check the assignment board, but I blinked once, and when I looked back, the bed was gone. Just gone. I froze there for a second, trying to process what just happened. I wasn't hallucinating. I swear I saw it. I even remember the weird angle of the bed. It wasn't lined up like the others, almost like it had been pushed in last minute. And the man, I didn't see his face fully, but something about him felt heavy, like grief in human form. Still, I chalked it up to sleep deprivation or some trick of the shadows. I didn't mention it to anyone. I just told myself I must have imagined it. But deep down, I knew I didn't. That image stuck with me for days. I even started avoiding that room when I didn't have to be there. Which, looking back, was dumb. But I couldn't help it. Something about it felt unfinished. A few days later, I was covering that same unit again, and one of the CNAs I worked with, Mia, sharp as hell, funny, no nonsense, pulled me aside during rounds. She said, "Hey, random question. Do we have a new patient in room 302? I told her no, and asked why. She looked uncomfortable, like she wasn't sure she wanted to say it out loud. I thought I saw someone in the corner bed just for a second. It was weird, like I walked past and he was there, but when I looked again, nothing. That hit me like a truck. I hadn't told anyone what I saw, and here Mia was, describing the exact same thing. The same damn bed, same corner. I didn't say anything right away. I just kind of laughed it off, but my stomach dropped. That same bed, that same man. I waited until we had a quiet moment at the nurse's station and told Mia what I'd seen a few nights earlier. She just stared at me, then said, "Okay, no, that's not funny," thinking I was messing with her. When I swore I was serious, her face changed completely. We sat there in silence for a while, both trying to act normal, pretending to be too tired to care. But we cared. That room felt different after that. You know when a place feels like it's watching you back? That's the best way I can explain it. The weird part is, it kept happening. Not often, but just enough that we started mentioning it in whispers. Another nurse, Anthony, brought it up one night out of nowhere. He was always skeptical of ghost stories, but he told me he swore there was a guy in the corner bed when he walked in to do vitals. No chart, no wristband, no response. Just lying there. Said when he stepped closer, the bed wasn't even there. Just empty space. Same room. Same damn spot. That made 3 of us now. Different shifts. Same experience. At that point, we knew it wasn't just imagination. I started digging. I pulled up room logs, bed assignments, anything I could get my hands on without setting off alarms with administration. I found something strange buried in an old report from January of that year, during the peak of the flu surge. Apparently, they'd temporarily squeezed a 7th bed into that corner. Just for a few weeks. They weren't supposed to, but there weren't enough rooms, and the hospital was overrun. According to the incident report, a male patient died in that bed. Equipment failure. Oxygen tank malfunction. They didn't go into detail, but there was a note about it being a preventable error, the kind of thing hospitals try to bury quietly. That shook me. I sat there for a long time just staring at the screen. The man we saw, or thought we saw, wasn't a stranger. He had a name, a history. I couldn't stop picturing that moment. The bed turned slightly off, the way he faced the window like he didn't want to be seen. I printed the report and took it home with me. I know, not exactly by the book, but I had to. I needed something to hold in my hand, something that made it real. His name was Thomas Baird, 63, came in with severe pneumonia. Died alone at 3:42 a.m. I think that was what hit me the most. That he died while the rest of us were just doing our jobs down the hall, probably laughing about something stupid over coffee. After that night, room 302 changed for me. I couldn't walk past it without looking toward that corner, even when I told myself not to. It became a reflex. Every time my eyes would go straight to that exact spot by the window, expecting to see him. Sometimes there was nothing. Other times, I could swear the curtain swayed just slightly, like someone had brushed past it. Once I went in to adjust an IV on one of the regular patients and felt a cold rush of air behind me. But the window was shut, the vents were off, and nobody had entered the room. That chill stayed on my skin for hours, like it had soaked in. I didn't tell anyone that time. I didn't need to. Mia said she'd started avoiding that room altogether, unless she had to go in. Anthony stopped doing vitals alone. I know how this sounds. I know there are skeptics who'd call it stress, sleep deprivation, whatever. I'd probably say the same thing if I were hearing this from someone else. But I lived it. I remember the exact sound of the curtain rings moving on their own. Not fast, just a slow drag, like someone was trying not to be noticed. I remember the way the air felt different in that room, like something was lingering, waiting. It never felt threatening. Just sad. Like someone who never realized they were allowed to leave. That's what haunted me most. Not fear. Guilt. As if we'd forgotten him, and he stayed behind just to be seen. About 2 weeks after we pieced everything together, the unit manager made a surprise announcement. They were doing a remodel of that wing. Repainting, replacing beds, reworking the layout to improve patient flow. But Mia and I knew what that really meant. They were clearing the room, removing that corner entirely, putting a supply closet where the bed had been. I don't think the higher-ups ever admitted what was going on, but I think someone else saw him too. Someone with more authority. Because they didn't just change the room, they erased it. That space, that corner, gone like it never existed. The last night before the renovations, I stayed late. I brought in a small battery-operated candle, the kind we used during night med rounds when patients were sleeping. I waited until the room was empty, lights low, and set it down in that corner. Just for a few minutes. I didn't say much, just stood there and whispered, "We remember you, Thomas." I don't know what I expected. A sign, a shadow, a breeze. But nothing happened. The air felt still, peaceful even. I left the candle there when I clocked out. The next night, the wall was up. Just drywall and silence. Since then, no one's seen the seventh bed again. But I still think about him. Not as a ghost. Just a man who died quietly and maybe just wanted someone to notice. I'm not the kind of person who believes in ghosts or anything like that. I'm a registered nurse. I work long shifts, drink too much coffee, and try to keep my patients alive. That's the extent of my daily existence. This happened back in 2019, during my second year working nights in the telemetry unit at a hospital in northern Illinois. I was 27 at the time, still new enough to feel nervous when the code pager buzzed, but comfortable enough to laugh through the chaos with the rest of the night crew. That night we were celebrating Denise's retirement. She'd been at the hospital for 36 years, and they gave her this hideous sheet cake with bright blue frosting that stained everyone's teeth. The break room was cramped, full of those beige chairs that look like they've been there since the 80s. Someone brought in a Bluetooth speaker playing throwback hits, and we were all piled in there, shoulder to shoulder, plastic forks in hand. Around 3 a.m., someone, I think it was Miguel, one of the techs, suggested we take a group photo to remember the night. So naturally, we took a dozen. A bunch of blurry selfies, a few group shots with someone's arm outstretched, people smiling, mid-laugh, exhausted, glowing from the fluorescent lights. I didn't think much of it. I was halfway through my slice of cake when we all started passing the phone around to see the photos. It wasn't until maybe 10 minutes later, when we'd all drifted back to our posts or the nurse's station, that Amber, a newer nurse on our unit, got really quiet. I remember her standing next to the med cart, just staring at her phone with this confused look. Then she said, "Hey, who's that behind Miguel?" We all leaned in, thinking she was pointing out someone making a dumb face or photobombing. But no. Behind Miguel's right shoulder, just barely visible in the narrow hallway behind the break room door, was a woman none of us recognized. Mid-50s, maybe older. Gray cardigan, eyes locked on the group, not smiling. Her expression was focused. Not mean, just oddly serious, like she was watching something closely. We went through every photo. In only one of them, the clearest one of course, she was there. The lighting in the hallway was dim, but her face was lit just enough that you could make out the detail. High cheekbones, tight bun, slight frown. No one remembered seeing anyone back there. The break room hallway leads to the storage closet and the staff restroom. We would have noticed if someone had walked through. That's when Denise, the one retiring, said something that made everyone fall silent. She looked at the photo, blinked a couple times, then whispered, "Holy hell, that's Lorraine. She's been dead for 10 years. At first I thought Denise was joking. I laughed a little like, okay, yeah, right. But she didn't even crack a smile. She just handed the phone back and sat down, staring at her half-eaten cake like she'd lost her appetite. Then she told us that Lorraine had been her supervisor when she first started on nights. She described her exactly like the woman in the picture. Stern, hyper-focused, always in a gray cardigan like it was part of a uniform. According to Denise, Lorraine was known for being a tough mentor, someone who trained you hard but made you better. She collapsed in the ICU hallway during a code, massive aneurysm, gone before they even got her to the table. That was back in 2009. The room changed after that. Amber asked if maybe someone printed out a picture of Lorraine and stuck it on the door as a prank. Miguel even walked down the hallway to check. Nothing there. No decorations, no posters, no glass or reflection that could have caused it. The picture still sat on the table, the woman clearly visible just over Miguel's shoulder, almost like she was leaning forward to get a better look. I found myself checking the timestamp on the photo, 3:03 a.m. Weirdly specific. And then Denise added something else, something that's stuck with me since. She said, "You know what's crazy? She died during a code. At almost exactly this time." That should have been the end of it. A creepy story. A weird photo. Maybe something you chalk up to coincidence. But a few hours later, during handoff, one of the ICU nurses mentioned something offhand that made my stomach drop. There had been a code blue in room 412 around 3:05 a.m. Right after we took that photo. She said it was chaotic. The patient crashed suddenly, everyone moving fast, shouting for meds, compressions, the usual. Except the primary nurse, Kelsey, swore she heard someone say, "Push epi now," right by her ear. Clear as day. Thing is, no one standing near her had said it, and she wasn't wearing her earpiece. We all kind of paused, glanced at each other, and I said, "Wait, 412? Around 3:05? Kelsey nodded slowly, looking a little creeped out now too. Then she added, "I could have sworn I felt someone behind me when it happened, like real close, but when I turned, no one was there." That was enough for Denise to whisper, half to herself, "Still coaching?" Nobody laughed. Nobody said a word. We just stood there in the hallway, the morning sunlight barely starting to seep through the stairwell windows, and I swear, it felt like someone else was standing there with us, listening. I went home that morning completely rattled. I kept trying to tell myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe someone wandered in off another floor and photobombed us without us noticing. Maybe someone did whisper during the code and Kelsey just didn't realize. But that photo kept nagging at me. I even showed it to my boyfriend later that day, and the first thing he said was, "Why does she look like she's listening?" That's what messed with me the most. The woman, Lorraine, didn't look ghostly or transparent. She looked present, like someone mid-task. Focused, calm, there. Over the next few weeks, it became this quiet kind of lore in the unit. No one talked about it too loudly, but stories started surfacing. A float nurse claimed she'd heard someone whisper, "Stay with me," while she was alone checking vitals on a crashing patient. One of the older techs swore he saw a shadow move behind him in an empty hallway near the staff lounge. And one night I caught Amber staring down that same hallway where Lorraine had been in the photo. She didn't say anything, but her face was pale, like she'd seen something. When I asked her later, all she said was, "She's still around. I feel it." I didn't stay on that unit much longer. I transferred to day shift 6 months later, and while part of me just wanted a more normal sleep schedule, the truth is, I couldn't shake that feeling, like we weren't alone during those nights. Like someone else was still walking those halls, watching, supervising. Not maliciously, just present. There were even moments I caught myself whispering things during emergencies, things I didn't even realize I knew, like someone else was feeding me the words. I'd never tell anyone that out loud, but it happened. More than once. I still have that photo, saved deep in my phone, in a locked album I never open. I haven't shown it to anyone in years, and honestly, I don't plan to. But I'll say this. I don't think Lorraine ever left that hospital. And maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe some people are just so wired into their purpose that even death doesn't flip the switch. She died mid-code. That was her world. Responding fast, staying sharp, teaching people how to act when seconds mattered. Maybe she's still doing that. Whispering, guiding, coaching. I don't know. But if you ever feel breath on the back of your neck during a code, and you know no one's behind you don't panic. Just listen. I'm an ICU nurse. Been one for about 9 years now, mostly night shifts, which messes with your sleep but gives you a strange kind of peace. Until something like this happens and scrambles your whole sense of reality. This took place back in 2021, right in the thick of that late COVID burnout period. We were all exhausted, emotionally drained, but still holding on because our patients needed us. I worked at a mid-sized hospital in Pennsylvania. Nothing fancy, but solid. Our ICU had 12 rooms, all single-bed units, each with its own monitor above the bed and another hooked into our central monitoring station. I've seen a lot of weird stuff over the years, hallucinations, end-of-life visions, even some unexplainable calls. But what happened in Bed 9 still sits heavy with me. That night was pretty quiet, which is rare. I remember feeling almost guilty for having time to sip lukewarm coffee at the nurse's station without an alarm blaring. Around 2:15 a.m., the monitor for Bed 9, which had a middle-aged guy named Leonard recovering from cardiac surgery, suddenly flatlined. Full-on asystole. No warning. Just a flat red line and the shrill beep that hits you straight in the chest. I shot up, ran in with 2 other nurses. The crash cart wasn't even fully out of the wall yet when I pushed the door open. And there he was. Leonard, sitting up, awake, breathing fine, looking at us like we were the ones who had died. "You okay?" I asked, breath caught in my throat. He just blinked, totally confused. Yeah, why wouldn't I be? We did a quick check. Vitals perfect, skin warm, pulse strong. The monitor beside his bed was showing normal sinus rhythm again, like nothing happened. I chalked it up to a lead coming loose. Maybe he rolled and it detached briefly. Happens all the time. But when I checked the leads, they were secure. Chest pads hadn't moved. No error messages, no warnings. I replaced the wires anyway, reset the monitor. Leonard just kept looking at us like we were being dramatic. "I feel fine," he repeated. But there was something off in his tone. Like, not fear, but this unsettling calm, like he didn't want to talk about something. I brushed it off at the time, thinking maybe he'd just been jolted awake and didn't want to make a fuss. But that wasn't the end of it. Around 4:30 a.m., same shift, I'm sitting back at the station scrolling through telemetry logs when I see movement on the monitor for Bed 9 again. This time, I swear I saw heart activity. Not Leonard's, something else. I look up. That monitor was no longer hooked into anything. Leonard had been moved to imaging an hour earlier for a CT, and the monitor had been idling. But the screen was active, showing a normal rhythm, a BPM of 87, and oxygen sat of 99%. Even weirder, the name flashing on the corner wasn't Leonard. It said Tyler M. I froze. We don't enter names into the local screens. That has to be done manually through the EMR system. I checked the patient list. No Tyler M. anywhere in the hospital that night. No patient had been in that room before Leonard for the past 3 weeks. I leaned forward, unsure if I was just sleep-deprived. But the waveform was clean. Whoever it was, they were alive. At least, in that moment. I called Biomed the next morning. I figured maybe someone had run a test or plugged in a backup unit by accident, and it just hadn't been documented. The guy who came up, Tom, older dude, been around forever, real no-nonsense. He checked the unit. pulled up its logs, then got weirdly quiet, like pale quiet. He unplugged the monitor and just stood there for a second. Then he asked, "Who used this last?" I told him Leonard had been the most recent patient, but that it had just suddenly displayed vitals under someone else's name. He didn't say anything for a while, then finally muttered, "This one shouldn't even be here." Turns out that specific unit had been marked out of service over a year ago. Not because it was broken, but because it had been involved in an incident. That word, incident, made me raise an eyebrow. Nurses hear that all the time, but this one felt loaded. I pressed Tom a bit, and he eventually told me that back in 2020, a teenage boy named Tyler Mendez had coded in that exact bed. Cardiac arrest, sudden and brutal. He was 17. The team tried to bring him back for over 20 minutes. He flatlined on that very monitor. Afterward, some nurses started reporting odd glitches with the unit. Random vitals appearing, false codes, ghost alarms with no patient in the room. Admin chalked it up to a software loop, pulled it from rotation, and Biomed shelved it. But somehow, and no one could tell me how, it had been wheeled back into circulation. It didn't even have a current ID in the system. It shouldn't have been hooked to anything. Later that day, I went back to the room just to sit in it for a moment. Daylight pouring in through the blinds made it feel less heavy, but there was still this weird stillness. That kind of too quiet stillness that makes your ears ring. I stood by the bed and just watched the empty monitor screen, now dark. I didn't expect anything. But then I heard it. Soft, like a voice caught between floors. A boy's voice. Just 3 words. "I'm still here." I turned around so fast I nearly slipped on the polished floor. Nobody was there. No one in the hallway. I even opened the bathroom door and checked under the bed, like some idiot in a horror movie. But deep down, I knew no one would be there. I sat back down in the corner chair, pulse racing, and felt this strange sensation, like I wasn't alone. Not threatened. Just watched. I didn't tell anyone about the voice. Not at first. Nurses get judged for less, and I didn't want to sound like I was losing it. But that same week I caught Sarah, one of our newer RNs, standing outside bed 9 just staring at the glass. I asked her what she was doing, and she said, "I thought I saw a kid sitting on the bed." She laughed it off, said maybe she was just tired. But the way she said it didn't match the joke. Her eyes were watery. She looked like someone trying not to believe what they'd seen. I didn't push her, just gave her a quiet nod. Because if I hadn't already heard that voice myself, maybe I'd be laughing too. That weekend I went digging through our digital archives. It took some time, but I eventually found the incident report from March 2020. Tyler Mendez, 17 years old, collapsed during a soccer game, brought in with a faint pulse, but deteriorated fast. He coded within minutes of arrival. The report mentioned his mother had been with him the whole time, screaming and praying while we worked on him. Apparently, after he was pronounced dead, she refused to leave the room for hours. Said she felt him still there. One of the nurses wrote that she begged the hospital to leave the room untouched for a few days. Admin didn't honor that. Bed 9 was cleaned and reassigned within 24 hours. Business as usual. But now I wonder, what if she wasn't wrong? In the weeks that followed, I paid closer attention to Bed 9. I never saw Tyler again, not directly, but sometimes I'd notice things. The monitor blinking even when unplugged. A cold draft when no doors had opened. A faint smell of antiseptic and sweat that lingered longer than it should have. Once, I walked past and heard the sound of someone breathing, steady and slow, even though the room was empty and unoccupied. It stopped the second I stepped inside. I started keeping a small notebook in my pocket, logging every odd occurrence. I wasn't the only one either. One of our night techs told me he'd seen a kid in a hoodie sitting at the edge of the bed, looking down at his feet. He said he blinked, and the kid was gone. Eventually, I brought all of this to our nurse manager, Dana, someone I trusted, someone who'd seen her fair share of strange things too. I laid it all out: the false vitals, the name on the screen, the voice, the text citing, and the biomed logs. To her credit, she didn't laugh. She just listened. Then she quietly had the monitor pulled again, personally walked it down to biomed, and made sure it was permanently decommissioned. That specific room was also temporarily closed for maintenance and later converted into a storage unit. No more patients have stayed there since. Some people think it was an overreaction. I don't. I think it was the first time someone actually respected that something stayed behind. It's been a few years now, and I still work the same hospital, same night shifts. We get new staff all the time, and most of them never even hear about Tyler or that monitor. But sometimes, on the really quiet nights, around 2 or 3 a.m., I still catch myself glancing at the door where bed 9 used to be. Not because I expect to see anything, but because some part of me remembers what I felt there. Not horror, not evil, just something unfinished. Like a life paused mid-sentence. And every now and then, I swear I hear the faint echo of that same boy's voice, soft and patient, still waiting. I'm still here,